This is MyZimVote. As a citizen of the 21st century, we saw an opportunity to use technology for Zimbabweans to check the status of their voter registration online. Conveniently, the Registrar General has refused to do so. This is how many hits our site, your site, has received in 2 short weeks. We have heard your concerns and calls for free and fair elections. We have read every one of your emails, over 3,000 now. Let's look at the big picture. Zimbabwe, once Africa's jewel, an industrializing and prosperous country. Food production was so high that Zimbabwe was named the food basket of Africa. Citizens enjoyed a good life. Goods and services were in abundance, and the currency was the strongest in the region. But during the mid-80s and 90s, Robert Mugabe gradually centralized power and reshaped the constitution, allowing him to rule unchallenged for 33 years. Human rights abuses intensified in 1982, with massacres during the notorious Gukurahundi campaign taking the toll. The ruling elite began to act with impunity, resulting in scandals and abuse of power, undermining democracy and the rule of law in the process. Corruption bled the economy. Hyperinflation destroyed the currency. Political violence was unleashed on defenseless citizens and sent millions into exile looking for work or political asylum. Zimbabweans have had enough. On July 31st, 2013, the most important election ever held in Zimbabwe takes place. No more power sharing, no more opposition parties. It's the last chance to set Zimbabwe free into a democratic society like in 2008. The powerful chefs cannot afford literally to lose, but they know that you are watching. SADC is watching. The African Union is watching. Indeed, the international community is watching. So they have designed tactics to manipulate the voters' roll. They will intimidate, confuse, delay, and frustrate those who wish to vote them out of office. Here are some of your stories as they reach us.
My name is Robson. I'm 27. I'm Zimbabwean. I was born in Gutu. In 2002, the Citizenship of Zimbabwe Amendment Act took away my citizenship and all right afforded to me. They said it's because my parents were not born in Zimbabwe. Therefore, suddenly I was no longer Zimbabwean. I was declared stateless, referred to as an alien, in my own country. This act was to prevent hundreds of thousands of us from voting. Then in 2013, my citizenship was restored. The new constitution of Zimbabwe gave back my citizenship, meaning I can now register, then vote, or so I thought. The law says I can now vote, but to register as a voter is very difficult. The Zimbabwe Electoral Commission, ZEC, does not want me to vote. On the first day of the mobile registration program, I went to register, but the locations were not published, so it took me half a day to find a registration center. When I got there, the queue was around the building, and only 2 officials were serving hundreds of people. I gave up and went home. After 3 days, I went again to register. Zimbabwe is poor and people must work every day to survive. It's difficult to wait for hours. The chefs, they know this. So when I got back to the registration center, it was closed and moved on to the next mobile center. After 1 week, I found a center but waited for many hours. When I got to the desk, the woman said I must get a new ID because my old one said alien. This is a new process and even longer queue. I stand in line again, but then they say I must get the birth certificate from my father and my mother. But I was determined to register and vote. After 3.5 weeks, I was finally able to register. But most of my friends, they can't stand in queue every day, so they failed to register. On 31 July, I will cast my vote to their horror. I am determined. No matter the queue, my vote will be heard.
My name is Rudo, and I'm a first-time voter. Like so many young Zimbabweans, I want to attend university one day. I want to vote for the first time and vote for a better Zimbabwe. My friends and I had tried to register, but I was the lucky one. It was very hard for me to wait in a queue all day long, especially as a young mother. My baby and my little one cried and cried in the queue. But I stayed because I want a better Zimbabwe for both of them. While waiting in the queue, I saw people skipping the queue. They were able to quickly register anyone they wanted. They simply had to bring the officials a piece of paper with a name and an ID number written on it. I made sure to bring my proof of residence, but I still had to plead with the officials to allow me to sign a document that has said I live at the same location as my husband, my own husband. The woman next to me was frustrated when officials told her she must renounce her British citizenship before she can register to vote. She had to go to UK for medical treatment. She had no choice but to get a British passport since she was no longer a Zimbabwe citizen. This is despite the fact that Zimbabwe's new constitution automatically classifies her as a citizen by birth. I was the lucky one. The new constitution guarantees my right to vote, and I am determined to vote. I will ask my sister to watch the little ones. I'm going to wait as long as it takes to cast my ballot. I want a Zimbabwe with schools and healthy care and jobs for my children.
My name is Tafazwa. I'm 41. I come from Mutare, where I live with my wife Tsitsi and my 2 sons, Desmond and Tatenda. My father fought with Zanla during the Liberation War. He was my hero. I wanted to follow his steps and I joined the police at age 19. I wanted to save my country, but my dreams have been shattered. Election time is a nightmare for us in the police. We are ordered to brutalize innocent civilians as part of their campaign tactics, and we are intimidated ourselves. As members of the police, we had special voting days on July 14 and 15. For 1 week before, our superior commanded us to fill in our ballots in his office. In front of him, ballots were also filled for the wives and children of those who complied. Those who refused were threatened, and 2 of my comrades were beaten and jailed. On the special election day, commanding officers took new recruits in vehicles to vote. These new recruits had been given a warm meal and were promised jobs after elections. Those of us left behind walked for over 3 hours to our polling stations only to find out it had no ballot papers. It was clear that chefs were trying to prevent us from voting, but we were determined. A brave man from our rural area gave his truck to take us to the other polling station 40 kilometers away. After 4 hours of waiting and a big argument with the polling agents, we were allowed to vote. There are 250 policemen in our police station, but 22 of us voted freely. More than 100 could not overcome the obstacles and did not vote. The rest were handled by our officers outside legal channels. Government records show that 69,000 police officers applied special voting, but the country only has 40,000 police officers. Come July 31st, me and some of my comrades will make sure citizens can vote freely. We will not save the chefs who have destroyed Zimbabwe. There are many more of us than there are of them, and we can shape a better future for our country.
My name is Tinashe. I am a Zimbabwean living in Soweto. There are 2 million of us Zimbabweans living in South Africa. We have come here because the Zimbabwean economy was killed by the greed and corruption. There are many more of us living in Botswana, Australia, America and England. 7 years ago I swam across the Limpopo River and walked for 3 days before I got a lift to Joburg. It was very hard, but I had no choice because there's no work in Zimbabwe. Since I got here I've suffered xenophobia attacks and have struggled to send money to my family in Zimbabwe to keep them alive. All this time I've been unable to vote because the chefs did not allow the diaspora to vote. Now I have a new constitution that allows us to vote, but the ZEC has not made provision for us to register and vote by post. They don't want us to vote, but they've made allowance for 120,000 diplomas to vote. It is ridiculous. The last election had 5,000 postal votes for diplomas, but now they have 120,000. I'm angry because I want my vote to count. Some of us has managed to go home and register, and I'll go back on the 31st of July to vote for a new Zimbabwe. I want a Zimbabwe that allows my family to go home.
This is Tobai Wamudede. He has been the Registrar General for 33 years, also known as Toriga. He's 3 years past the mandatory retirement age. Toriga likes to manipulate the voters' roll. You see, the rigging begins well before election day. It's an around-the-clock job, and Mr. Toriga does an excellent job. Just take note of these statistics. There are over 42,000 people over the age of 100 listed. Does Zimbabwe have the fountain of youth? Millions of people have magically changed addresses and constituencies. You know you must vote in the constituency you are registered in. There are well over 1 million people on the roll who are either deceased or departed. Trying to use someone else's name to cast a vote? 78 constituencies have more registered voters than inhabitants. How can that be? Despite the voters' roll consisting of nearly 6 million people, only 45,000 youth were found in the roll versus over 500,000 youths listed on the latest census. Don't want the youth to vote? Stop lying to us. On the 31st July, you have the chance to show him that Zimbabweans will no longer be cheated of their democratic right to vote. Make sure you vote. Do not let him delay you, deceive you, frustrate, or confuse you. Let your vote be counted.